it's time to start the question and answer period. If you'd like to ask a question, please walk around to the back of the hall, back of the house. Stand behind the pink line by the usher and he will guide you to ask a question. Everyone gets a maximum of one question.
Hey Ben, thank you for coming here. So I have a question. Many Jews don't like defining Jews as an ethnicity because it was used as a justification for the Holocaust.
Right.
Do you think it is dangerous to define Jews as an ethnicity?
I don't think that Judaism is an ethnicity in a way that matters to me, meaning that there is such a thing as Jewish ethnicity, but I don't really care about it. Right? As an Orthodox Jew, I define Judaism as a philosophy, a culture, a religion. I don't care if your mom is Jewish. Right? Religiously speaking, I do because it's a prereq. Like you're born into Judaism, you are now religiously, it is incumbent upon you to be a Jew, but you can also convert into being a Jew. I have relatives who have converted into being Jewish. So the part that I care about when it comes to Judaism is not the ethnic part. There are plenty of people who I think are absolutely awful and actually anti-Semitic and are terrible people who are ethnically Jewish. The name Noam Chomsky comes to mind. Right? Like there are plenty of Jews who I just think are ethnic Jews, who I think are terrible people. Now, that doesn't mean that the conflation of the term is odd to me. That's why I've said before that I think there's such a thing as bad Jews, and people get very mad. Oh, bad Jews! How could you say bad Jews? What I mean by bad Jews is the same thing that a Christian would mean if he said somebody's a bad Christian, meaning that there's a set of values that being Jewish means, and if you violate those values, you could be bad at being Jewish, right? I mean, you could be bad at being Christian. So if you are a Jew, and for example, you believe that the state of Israel should be abolished, you believe that Judaism is a cult. You believe that Zionism is racism, you side with people who say all of these things, I think you are being a bad Jew, because I think that you are fundamentally betraying the philosophy and religion that Judaism represents. I don't think you're betraying your ethnicity. I don't care about your ethnicity. I think it's completely irrelevant.
Hi, Ben. My question is about assimilation, intermarriage, and the American melting pot. A common critique of immigrants to the US is that they don't want to assimilate, but rather preserve their status as a separate ethnicity, culture, religion, or nationality within the US. Some parents may teach their kids to only marry within their identity subgroup. To me, that's not consistent with judging people on the content of their character, which I stipulate is a fundamental American value. I acknowledge that shared values are important for a successful marriage, and people have the right to marry whoever they want. Nevertheless, I think teaching one's children to self-segregate in marriage, there's something un-American about that. What do you think?
So I disagree in the sense that I agree with the one statement you made, which is that shared values are key to a solid marriage, and shared religious values are very key to a solid marriage. How are you going to bring up your kids? Are you going to religions conflict, for example? I think that the question you're really asking is about the Jewish law that suggests that you're not supposed to marry people who are not Jewish. I don't have a problem with that. Not only do I not have a problem with that, I don't have a problem with Christians saying they want to marry other Christians or Muslims saying they want to marry other Muslims. I think there are certain overarching values in the United States that we all have to believe in, regardless of our religious values. But I think that what you agree on inside of marriage actually has to be broader and deeper than what you have to agree on to remain in the same country. There are a lot of people in this room, we all live in the same country, and I hope that we all believe in the values of the Constitution of the United States. When I married my wife, my first question was not, do you believe in the values of the Constitution of the United States? It was, what are the values that you and I want to raise our children with? What religion do we want to raise our children in? What are the things we want to teach our kids? And there has to be a lot more commonality in the four walls of my home than there do inside the country. Thank God, because I don't want Americans to be a bunch of widgets. I am fine with religious diversity in America so long as we agree on the key principles of the Constitution of the United States and the Declaration of Independence. America's a creedal country, right? That's the good stuff. But I'm not going to mandate that anybody has to marry anybody else in order to demonstrate how broad-minded they are, because even if they disagree on religion, even if they disagree, like I don't think those are the only values. They are the baseline values for us to share a country. Baseline values to share a country are not the same as baseline values to share a marriage or a bed.
Okay.
Thanks.
Pride is free speech. Dressing in drag is self-expression. Why respect that?
So I studied math. I love idealized systems, and so it seems to me like if you could build a nation from scratch, apart from the messiness of the real world, the idea of limited government, where everyone kind of pulls themselves up by their own bootstraps, is a great system. But given that for the majority of the existence of America, the government has had laws in place that selectively advantage certain parts of society, we don't live in that idealized world. To what extent do you support the government using resources to bring up people that have been disadvantaged in society, namely the poor, so that we can get to a point where there is some sort of level starting point?
Well, I mean, I think that first of all, you have to distinguish between members of the poor. I mean, treating the poor as like a universal class that doesn't have any sort of income malleability or movement is a category error, meaning that a lot of people who are poor now are not going to be poor in the future. Right, so the fact is that we have a lot of income mobility in our society. I remember a time when I was earning a fraction of what I make now. Thank God, I'm sure there will be a point in the future when I'm canceled where I'll make a fraction of what I'm making now. Right, people move up and down on the income scale, and I think that's fine. If the question is, do I think that the government has a role in bettering the lives of people who have suffered, I think that the government is the organ of last resort, meaning that the government signing checks typically has not truly done a great job in raising people from poverty. In fact, it has tended to create a sort of perpetual poverty if it creates dependence. And creating the proper incentive structure from an economic point of view, where you're giving somebody just enough money that they're still working and they still want to raise themselves up, but not enough money that they're going to stay home, it's turned out to be actually a pretty difficult task in practice. The Republicans have tried to do this, I think, in the past by adding work requirements for welfare, for example. But on a general level, my preferred method is that if you are experiencing financial difficulty, this is why I rely so heavily on social fabric, right? I've talked a lot about family, I've talked a lot about community and religious community. First you go to family, then you go to religious community, or whatever community you're a part of. Then you go to local government, then you go to state government, then you go to the feds. Right? Meaning that there should be this sort of movement all the way along the line. I think that unfortunately in the United States we've reversed that. And we've said, okay, the option of first resort is to go to the federal government, and the option of second resort is to go to the state government. And at no point do you look to yourself or to your neighbors. And we've seen payments in cash form or in the form of benefits as entitlements. And I don't think anybody is entitled to anything. I don't think you're entitled to that stuff simply by virtue of living in America. I think that you should feel a feeling of debt for whatever you happen to receive in the mail from other taxpayers who are footing the bill for that, or future generations who are. So the role of government should be minimal at best. You're right that there are going to be certain circumstances where the government does have to step in. I would prefer that it's local government because smaller communities have greater interest in the people who live in those communities. I care a lot more about people who live in my city than I do about people who don't live in my city. I know the people in my city, I don't know the people who don't live in my city. You know, so I think that this is particularly true when you're talking about people who suffer, who can't take care of themselves, legitimately can't take care of themselves. We're talking about the severely mentally ill, talking people who are severely disabled, right? People who are incredibly sick. Right? If you're talking about signing some sort of benefit check to those because everything else has fallen through, without creating an incentive structure such that the community is not incentivized to take care of them, that's something I could get on board with as a last resort, but I think the problem is we've seen it as a first resort. And so now it's a question of direction. Are we moving toward a smaller government or moving toward a bigger government? Is the problem not enough government benefits, or is the problem that government has stepped in and quashed the ability of private people to take care of each other in order to make society better, specifically for individual people, right? When somebody in my community is suffering, they go to my shul and they ask the rabbi for money, and then we all chip in. I mean, I'm a big believer in charity. I'm a big believer in people helping each other out. I think it's better for them, I think it's better for society than the government sucking enormous quantities of cash out of the system and then injecting it randomly as though they're putting filler in somebody's butt.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I just had a question about a comment you made at the beginning about transitioning from male to female or otherwise.
Yes.
You've talked a lot tonight about how important it is to let people believe what they want to believe and how the government and us have no say telling people what they should think or what they should be able to say. I just wanted to ask, what's the harm, if somebody's going to be a happier person because they say that they're a man or a woman, like what's the harm in just letting them do it?
I'm not in favor of government banning people who are adults. Children I'm in favor of banning because now you're talking about somebody who's not capable of consent. Right? All of our laws are based on the ability of people to consent if your child can't consent. I'm very much in favor of banning gender transition for kids. I think that it's frankly evil. I think you're making decisions for children who are not capable of making decisions for themselves that are permanent and have long-lasting, significant, and severe impact. As far as adults, if you're 25 and you want to get a sex change surgery and you feel like it's going to make you feel better, you have the right to do it. You do. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I mean, the research on this stuff tends to be somewhat conflicting, but if it works for you, it works. It's a free country. Now, that's really not the question that's being asked in our society today. Because I don't think there are that many people who are like, we want to ban gender surgery for a 30-year-old. I'm not seeing the campaign for that. What I am seeing is a campaign on the left that says that my child is going to be removed from my home 10 years from now if I don't agree with the left's view of how I should treat my child's gender confusion at age 4. I see the left suggesting that they want to fine me if I refuse to say that a man is a woman as a general proposition. Or if I say that men and women are separate, then the left says this is discrimination. Or the left is going to suggest that it has no impact on my business if I employ a woman at Hooters and she shows up the next day as a man. Right, like that does have an impact on my business, right? But the left would suggest, well, you should sort of deal with it. Well, it turns out that gender does mean something, and it does have an actual meaning to people outside of you. I'm not going to go along with the general societal willingness to rewrite basic facets of human nature and human biology, and frankly, mammalian biology, in order to suggest that a delusion is true. Now, if the best thing for the person is for the person to continue, they can't change what they're thinking, there's no way for them to get out of it, they want to change their body so they feel that it is more in line with what they're thinking, more power to them, that's their problem. And as I've said before, by the way, I've said this 1,000 times and everybody on the left automatically ignores it, of course. I've said that if I were in a room with a transgender person having dinner with that person, I wouldn't go out of my way to call them by their biological sex. Because it's rude, right? I wouldn't do that if I were sitting right across from them. But if you're asking me in a public forum whether a man is a man and a woman is a woman, or asking me to call a man a woman in a public forum, the answer is no.
Hi, good evening, Mr. Shapiro. Thanks for speaking today. I've noticed on the Daily Wire website, there is no readily accessible public editorialized policy. My question is for you is, on what do you base your journalistic ethical standards for your publication?
I mean, it's sort of a vague question. I mean, can you be more specific in what it is you object to about the site so I can defend it? Because, I mean, the general proposition is that we are an opinion conservative site. We do I believe that like every other news institution, we try to cover the truth. We sometimes make mistakes. If we do make mistakes, we retract it. And what exactly is it that you're asking?
Right, so my question is, like, for example, for every other mainstream media news outlet, there are ethical standards set by, for example, the Society of Professional Journalists, AP News, Reuters, which define how you should cover certain things, how you should retract certain articles, and I couldn't even find on your website like a specific link to previous news articles that you had retracted in the past.
I mean, in terms of what we've retracted, like full-on retractions in the past, that'd probably only be a couple of articles that have turned out not to be true, and so we've run retractions. You probably search in the bar. Honestly, I don't know. We've run thousands and thousands of articles. We run hundreds every week. As far as corrections, we issue corrections all the time, just like every other news outlet. I've never felt the need to issue a giant editorial policy, also because I don't think journalistic institutions actually keep up with their own journalistic policies half the time. So, bottom line is, here's the bottom line. Regardless of what the policy is, the proof is in the pudding. Either you like the site or you don't, either you believe the site or you don't, either you think we're lying or you don't. I don't think that articulating a policy, a 5-page policy that you're, first of all, I'm glad that you're the person who reads the policies. Because really, like, they write these policies and lawyers spend lots of time figuring them out and no one has ever read them. So congratulations to you. You are the person who read the policies. Really, good for you. But I think that in the end, people believe news outlets based on what they find to be credible and not based on the articulated policy of the news organization. I find the New York Times to be credible sometimes and not credible sometimes. And their editorial policy has nothing to do with it, really. Yeah, it's fine, but one more, yeah.
So, do you have any objective ethical standard, or is it purely based off of your subjective reasoning and opinion?
Well, I think that whenever it comes to interpretation of news, there's a certain subjectivity level. I reject outright the idea that news outlets are purely objective. I don't think the New York Times is objective, I don't think we're objective. I don't think CNN is objective. I think that the best way for people to read news is to read our site and then read Huffington Post, and whatever we have in common is the common basis of fact, and whatever we don't have in common is opinion.
Hi Ben, I'm Neil. I study CS at Stanford. I am a huge fan of yours. I watch you on YouTube all the time. I do lean left, however, so I disagree with you on some issues.
Well, first of all, okay, quick, can we have a show of hands? People who are liberal to left in the audience, people who disagree with what I say. Can you raise your hands, please? Thank you for coming. Like, really, makes the country better when you come to this, and we should go to your lectures too. It's good. I mean, we do. They're called the professors.
So my question is about abortion. That's the issue that I disagree on. You make a very good argument, and I'm going to run with this notion that life starts at conception.
Okay.
In Freakonomics, Stephen Levin, Stephen Dubner, they talk about how the people who get abortions are the people who need abortions because they can't afford to raise a child, and children who grow up in households that don't have the resources to raise them disproportionately become violent criminals and end up murdering people. So my question is, why do you prefer the life of the unborn fetus over the lives of existing individuals?
Okay, so a couple of answers on this. First, I think there are serious challenges to the Levitt thesis that the crime rate, so the basic thesis of Stephen Levitt in Freakonomics is that the crime rate drop is associated with the advent of Roe versus Wade. The Roe versus Wade happened, millions of babies got aborted, and then those babies that were aborted couldn't commit crimes, and so the crime rate dropped. The problem is the timeline doesn't actually match up. The crime rates didn't begin to drop until 1994. Roe versus Wade happens in 1973. The vast majority of violent crime, or at least a huge plurality of violent crime, is happening for kids who are actually born, but who are actually between the ages of 15 and like 23. So what you would have expected is that there would have been a massive crime rate drop in the late 80s, mid to late 80s, not a crime rate drop in 1994. The reason you got a crime rate drop in 1994 was additional resources provided by the federal government and the states to policing. So putting aside the statistical argument, now to the moral argument. So the moral argument is that is being made by you, and I don't want to mischaracterize it, is that the probability that, or possibility that somebody's going to grow up to be a killer means that they are putting some quotient of life at risk. The problem is that you cannot kill somebody based on a probability. You wouldn't do this in any form of life, right? We can't have a Tom Cruise Minority Report approach to children or to criminals in real life, right? There's a big room. I'm sure somebody at this point in this room will commit a crime. That crime may be serious. That doesn't mean that if I just killed everyone in the room, I've now prohibited the crime. Or if I killed the one person in the room who I think is most likely to commit the crime, it's not you, don't worry. That if I killed that one person, that would be okay. Because again, I'm making a forejudgment about behavior that has not yet occurred. So it is true that a lot of people who have abortions are poor. It is true that a lot of people who have abortions may not have great resources to raise the child. The solution to that is not to kill the child in order to prevent possible future crime. The solution is that people should be having babies more responsibly, and that local communities, particularly religious communities, should step in and help out when single moms need help. And by the way, that does happen a lot, right? And that's something that should be happening in increasing numbers. It's also why the government should stop incentivizing single motherhood by cutting checks and playing dad.
Hi, Ben. I'd like to ask a question about identity politics.
Sure.
So, to establish credibility, I guess, I'm a little brown, first-generation American, immigrant and LGBT activist. I'm also conservative.
Sorry to the person who gave a shout out before, that there's more to the description.
I believe we can be friends with people we disagree with. But as a result of this combination of identities, I've been called a bigot, a race traitor, I've been mocked, and all this kind of stuff, which kind of led me to become a closet conservative.
Mm-hmm.
So my question to you is, what advice do you have for closet conservatives to survive in a climate or an environment like a college campus like this so that I can get A's in my classes, but also voice my opinion on essays?
Okay, so I have one. As you can see from the people in the crowd, thank you for being somebody who doesn't identify by your identity groups, but more identifies by the things that you believe. I think that's very important. Beyond that, the best way to get by, so I have a thriving debate with my friend Dennis Prager on this. So Dennis, who hasn't been in college in a while, he thinks that you should just say whatever you want. You should say it clearly and publicly in front of professors, and if you get the C, you've stood up for principle. And I think this is silly. So what I have always suggested is that the means must be tailored to meet the ends. In class, you're not there to mouth off, you're there to get the A and move on to whatever grad school you want to go to. Right? I mean, that's what you're there for. And if you're writing in blue books, anonymity provides you with a certain amount of protection. And what that means really is that you can speak out as much as you want in many cases in the class, and then if you write in the blue book, you can write what the teacher wants to hear and get the A. That was my plan at UCLA. So in class, I was Frederick Hayek, I was Milton Friedman, I was Thomas Sowell, and then in my blue books I was Bernie Sanders. And it worked out great, right? I mean, like, and it's not immoral, because the truth is that the professors are not testing you on your actual thoughts, right? The professors very often are testing you on how well you parrot back to them their thoughts. And so, all right, fine, if that's the game, then I can play the game. But I'm not going to sacrifice my future career and earnings simply to make a point to a professor who's more than happy to lower my grade in order to punish me. So, I think a little practicality goes a long way. But you should speak out when you can. The question is, when can you?
Yo, huge fan. I used to be those guys outside in the signs, and I used to be huddled in my room in Oakland watching you on YouTube. Watching these guys get destroyed. So my question is, have you been keeping up with what's going on with Roger Stone, and what your thoughts on maybe some of the jurors or the judge that might be going against him?
So, to be honest with you, I haven't
Also, Epstein didn't kill himself.
Okay, I'll admit that's never going to stop being funny. Unfortunately, I don't have a good answer on this. I haven't been watching the Stone stuff too closely because, honestly, my focus has been on impeachment 2019, all that kind of stuff. So I've been really watching that pretty closely. I wish I had a better answer on Stone. If you have another question you want to ask me, go for it, because that answer on Stone's not good.
Actually, yeah, there was a guy outside, Felix, a really nice guy, talking about healthcare is the right for everyone. And he brought up some stuff I'd never even heard of, like France, Japan, and Singapore have a two-tier system for healthcare.
Yes.
It means healthcare is a right, a human right for everyone. And he brought up that, if you had enough money, you could pay for it, or there's a government one. And these are just ideas that I never heard before. And what are your thoughts? How do you refute that?
So there are a couple of basic questions. The framework I like to use when I'm talking about healthcare and thinking about healthcare is that healthcare, you can have three attributes of healthcare: affordability, quality, universality. Right? It can be cheap, it can be good, and it can be for everyone. But you can only have two of those things. You can't have all three. There is no program that is cheap and good and for everyone. It just does not work that way. Right? If it's cheap and it's universal, then you're going to end up with rationing, which is sort of what you have in Canada and the UK. If you have universal and good, it ends up being pretty expensive. And that's kind of what you have in the United States, sort of, because the truth is that there is basically universal healthcare in the sense that if you go to the hospital, they can't turn you away, but it's very expensive in the United States. Now, it's also on demand. You can get, we are the truth is the world has a two-tier healthcare system. It goes like this: you live in a socialized country, and then if you have money, you come here for your surgeries. Right? But the question is what kind of health system you would like to create. The health system that I would prefer is one that is cheap and good, but not completely universal. And then the gaps are filled by charity hospitals, the gaps are filled by local government. The reason for that is because the vast majority of medical innovation happens in the United States. It's very easy for everybody to live off the legacy of the fact that all of the best drugs are created here, all the best surgeries are invented here, that all of the stuff that the rest of, it's basically like the American economy, right? The American economy goes south, everybody is toast. Well, if the American medical innovation system goes south, everybody is toast. There are no new medicines that are being created. So a free market system incentivizes the creation of new, better surgeries. It incentivizes more doctors. There are doctor shortages in a lot of these places. Singapore is we can get into the vagaries of all of these systems. They're all very, very different. But what I would suggest is that America needs to move in a more free market direction, because more free market means lower prices generally and more innovation. It doesn't achieve universality for people, for example, who have pre-existing conditions on insurance. That's where you need charity to come in, and again, as a last resort, maybe local government.
This will be the last question.
Hi, thank you very much for the talk and for speaking to us today. My question is about how often in your videos and articles you talk about America being the best country in the world, and I'm wondering whether that contradicts your belief in both economic freedom and the right to life for the unborn, because based on indices I've seen for economic freedom, for example, America is, I think, 17th on Cato Institute's Index of Freedom, 12th for Heritage Foundation's Economic Freedom Index, and for right to life for the unborn, it's, I think, one of only 7 countries that permits third trimester abortions. So how would you give like a factual defense for America being not just one of the best, but the best country in the world?
Sure. Okay, so here's how I would put it. The best baseball team in baseball is the Washington Nationals. They won the World Series. Okay? That does not mean that every player on their team is the best at his position. Right? The United States is the best overall. If you could choose anywhere in the world to grow up, to have a chance at success, the United States would be the place. We have the most robust economy. We have freedoms that you don't have in other places in the world: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly. We have constitutional freedoms guaranteed. Right? All of these things are wondrous things that not only are unique, but also undergird the rest of Western civilization. I mean, again, as the United States falls, so does everybody else. That does not mean that I think that our generalized abortion policy is the best on earth, nor does it mean I think that our generalized tax policy is the best on earth. Now, it is also true that the Economic Freedom Index, very often, like that particular study, tends to deal with regulatory climate. The United States' regulatory climate, particularly with regard to foreign investment, for example, is weak and needs to be strengthened. It's why we all are looking to make it better. Right? America can get better in a variety of ways. But what I mean by that is America is the least racist country on earth. It is the place with the most opportunity on earth. It has done the most good for the most people in America and around the globe. America is the most rights-based country on earth. It has the best creed that has ever been created by man in the history of man. It seems like a pretty good start. Well, thank you so much. I really